I'm now talking with uh, Susan O'Donnell, and I'll ask her to introduce herself.
Sure, Mike, thanks. I'm a researcher and adjunct professor at the University of New Brunswick here in Fredericton, and I also work as a senior researcher at the National Research Council.
Okay, and you're currently doing very significant integrated research set of projects in Northern Ontario. Do you want to just briefly
Talk
outline?
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. I've been working since 2005 with the Keewatin-Nikokamaconic Tribal Council in Northwestern Ontario, and since almost that long with the Atlantic Canada's First Nations Help Desk in Member 2 First Nation here in the Atlantic. And then since 2008, with the First Nations Education Council in Quebec. So I have three partners, and we've been working together quite closely over the past number of years on a community informatics project, looking at how remote and rural First Nations communities in Canada are using broadband technologies for a range of services and activities. And of course, then, what some of the issues are.
You call this community informatics research. Um, could you give an explanation of why you think this is community informatics research? And what's distinctive about it as community informatics research?
Sure. Well, actually, the focus on community makes it distinctive, and it's kind of interesting because, in certain fields like in sociology or communications, you hear the word community a lot. But when you actually look at the literature out there and the kind of research that people are doing, it's really community informatics research that focuses on the community as a unit. And that makes it really different, in my experience, from other kinds of projects I'm involved in and other research that I'm working with, where the focus might be on the individual or the organization or the larger social processes. But by focusing on the community, it means that you're trying to understand everything that you see and that you're studying within that particular configuration. And so that's, to me, what makes it community informatics research.
And what about methods? Are there any methods that would be particular to a community informatics research, or which would be of more usefulness in a community informatics research context?
hmm Well, I think I mean, certainly participatory research, and that would be fairly well understood in the CI community, that you have to be working in true partnership, certainly in collaboration, but partnerships are better, like real partnerships. So that's sort of the overall approach. In terms of methodologies, I think there's a range that can be used. In my own experience, I've found in my work that in-depth interviews, works really well. One of the things that I'm wanting to explore more is narrative inquiry, and trying, because in the communities I work with, storytelling is very prominent for a number of reasons, and it can help. Not only is it a traditional way for people to share information, but the act of storytelling and talking about things can have all kinds of positive impacts in terms of reinforcement of cultural identity. And then there's lots that you can do as a researcher with the community with those stories. So um, getting people to tell stories, I suppose, which for me is often in an interview format, but there's other ways of doing it that I'm hoping to experiment with.
Interesting. And you've talked about the role of the community as a partner. Do you want to explore that a bit?
Sure. Well, and I should say, to give everyone an idea of how I got into this research and am approaching it when I talk about the partners that I work with, that I work with regional organizations who have very considerable day-to-day contact with First Nations that they work with. So each of my partners would have a number of First Nations that they would work with, quite intensively as part of their day-to-day operations. And what that means for me is that by having partners with the regional organizations that have an ongoing capacity and an ongoing organization, that I can work with them in a long-term project. Whereas at the community level, in the First Nations communities, the leadership can change every 2 years because of the election structure. And so sometimes it might be more appropriate in some communities than others, depending on the leadership and what's going on in the community. So we do collaborative research with the communities, and in my experience so far, that time of being together with the community would be around between a year and 2 years. But with the partners, it goes on much longer. But again, usually within a year and 2 years, we can do some research together collaboratively with the community and write some papers together. I should say that our projects have publication policies. That the URLs for those projects are, well, they're called Videocom and First Mile, and maybe you can give the URLs later. But we do have a publication policy that we worked out over a couple of years, and it says in our case that every publication has to have an Aboriginal co-author, and every community-based publication, based on the research that we're doing with specific communities, has to have at least one community co-author. So that whole process is part of what we do with the communities as well, is identifying, and this involves, right back to the consent forms that we use when we're interviewing participants about asking them if they want to get involved, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a whole range of things, always thinking about how can you get community members involved and engaged in this research, both the participants that you're working with and also at the leadership and program level.
I guess one of the distinctive things for me about community informatics research is that it isn't, it's research with a point. That is, it has a particular, it's meant to fit into a particular discussion or a particular policy outcome. Do you want to talk about that a bit? I'm thinking that your research is related to that as well.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike. And I'm not sure where you're going with this one, but I can tell you where I'd like to take this one. Okay. All right. Well, I do see, and more, especially in the particular projects and communities that I'm involved in, is there's often very much a difference in values between a community-oriented, which would be kind of a collective, holistic vision of growth and development, and particularly around technology and broadband, and seeing it as an enabler, for example, for a whole range of community services, being concerned about things like effective use for everybody in the community, and maybe a community might be hesitant to introduce a new technological process or tool unless they feel that community members and all community members would be comfortable with it, and it's not just for the most elite in the community or whatever. So those kinds of communal, holistic concerns would be very prominent in the communities that I work with. On the other hand, we have the policy environment, and I'll just talk about the Canadian federal policy environment, where we have a situation where what is seen as important is the growth of the private sector and, corporations, and a kind of mentality which is, if, communities are good because they're consumers that can buy things, that can make money for corporations, that can hire people, and somehow it'll all trickle down, and we'll all be better, happier people with a higher standard of living. Well, of course, it doesn't work that way, and so what you often get are these, not often, what's happening is there's two conflicting values about how we want to move forward as a society, as a country, etc. And I think that community informatics and community vision, which is this more collective, holistic, local control, etc., is very much at odds with the current policy rhetoric and that we see coming out of the federal government. So that's where I would see the conflict, and I'm not sure if that's what you were talking about, Mike, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I guess what I was saying, I was thinking more in terms of specific contributions to say service policy in the health area or governance area, because I think that really is the part of the content of your research. which I think is very
Yeah,
interesting.
very much so. Thanks for pointing that out. Well, one of the things that we're coming to see with we've already always known this, but we haven't highlighted it enough, and we want to highlight it more in our work, is the innovation that goes on in communities. And
Right.
I think when we're talking about service delivery, um, the communities I'm working with are working with minuscule budgets compared to what you would see like in health centers, even in rural areas like here in New Brunswick. These are communities with all, a whole range of health needs if we're talking about health services, and they have minuscule budgets, and so they're often and they've got so many different needs, so they're often using the technologies to just try out things. And what I'm finding through the range of research that I do is that the things that are happening in these First Nations communities, they're years ahead in some ways of because of the way the bureaucratic structures work in the health system, et cetera, where it's more difficult to try out little innovative things here and there. And so I think that what we can really be looking to is the innovation that happens in communities and what we can learn from that, and sometimes a lot of times I think we can see them as leaders in terms of where we can go with these technologies in future.
Well, we've run out of time. We could continue forever on this, Susan. Thank you. This is great, and
Okay.
so I'm going to cut this off now at this
All right.
point, and